Hey, this is Dustin Smith. We're here on what I'm calling right now Blue Fire Talks. That name could very well change. I'm not sold on any particular name. It's just really one of the first things that came to mind, and we're gonna try to stick with that right now. Without further ado, though, today we're gonna be talking about dealing with disappointment. You know, what happens when you are going through life and things don't quite happen in the way that you expect them to. How do you respond to that? I believe there's the great author Chuck Swindoll that said life is 90% how you respond and only 10% what happens to you. Better than you guys just hearing what I have to say, I actually want to bring on a guest. So we have Pastor Jonathan Reyes from Faith Assembly. He's on the line right now. Hey, John.
What's going on, everybody? Hello. Thank you, Dustin, for having me. I'm super excited to share,
Yeah,
and particularly excited for the two topics that you've kind of laid
right.
out in front of us. They're pretty
Absolutely.
exciting things to discuss. So
Yeah. Well, hey, man. Before we dive into those topics, go ahead and share a little bit about yourself. I know you serve at the one and only Faith Assembly of God
yes, sir.
in Orlando, Florida.
Yeah, absolutely. So so a little bit about myself. My name is Jonathan, and yes, I'm the youth pastor at Faith Assembly's Redbug Lake campus here in Orlando, Florida.
Yeah,
And I have been for coming up on 2 years now.
right.
It was around Easter of 2 years ago when I was graciously offered the assignment and position to be that. But anyways, I'm 24 years old, and it was around I believe the year 2000. So I was about 4 years old at the time when me and my family actually moved from New Jersey, and that's where I was born. I moved to Orlando, Florida, because, long story short, my father had passed
Yeah,
away. I'm one of seven brothers and sisters,
yeah,
and so my mom, of course, needed a little bit of help with that load right there. So she moved down to a neighborhood where her parents, my grandparents, had retired to not too long before that. And lo and behold, that neighborhood actually ended up being right across the street from a church, of which you could see the steeple from our backyard, which is pretty cool. But that was Faith Assembly back when it was on a road called Goldenrod here in Florida. And so basically, we moved down here. I went to school down here, and around middle school, it was actually in middle school. My mom
yeah,
put me in the school that's attached to Faith Assembly called Faith Christian Academy. So coupled with that, I went through the middle school ministry at our church, the high school ministry,
yeah,
and then I interned in 2014 for the college age and young adult ministry.
yeah.
Served there, and that's really where God kind of took a hold of my life in a new way, and where He kind of opened my eyes to abilities that he had placed inside of me that I didn't know about beforehand. Not only abilities, but passions, and really, in certain ways, anointings, specifically in regards
Right.
to people and connecting with people. And again, really, I want to emphasize that in ways I never thought were there, like at all. So it was around 2014, 15, and 16 where he kind of grew that inside of me and really kind of blew that up. And then after internship, it was about a year of just staying faithful, serving at my church, wondering in my head where God was going to take me and what was next. And about a year and change later, I was offered the position to be youth pastor at our church and at our new campus. And it's been incredible. I love my students over there. We're actually starting youth nights once a month, coming up on March 27th, actually 20 days from today. And it's been incredible, man. Seriously, being able to be a part of such an amazing church and to see God move in my life and then through my life, into the lives of other people is just, there are no words when I look back on all the memories and youth events that impacted me and brought me to where I'm at today. And I'm sure you have similar stories, obviously, but yeah, that's a little bit about myself and how I've gotten to this point in my life to this day.
Yeah, man. Well, it's been really great to kind of be at a distance and see your journey.
Yeah.
So I went to the University of Florida to study aerospace engineering, and that was a really great experience being
It's awesome.
being
My
there,
goodness.
getting that degree.
Yeah.
So my relationship with Faith Assembly and being a part of the youth was different when I was there. I'd come back during the summers when I could, and I would go to the Voice and attend Sunday mornings. But it wasn't the same as when I was in high school, and I believe you were 1 year behind me.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
when I was in 12th grade, you were in 11th grade, and
Yeah.
so on and so forth. And so I saw you then, and I knew that you were involved. Um, I'm not sure, were we in under shepherds together? Uh,
Well, I never did under
you
shepherds,
didn't do
but
that.
I knew you had.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So you you played drums, right?
That is
Like
correct. Yeah.
like you played drums.
For youth
Yeah.
services. Yeah.
Yeah. And you so you were big in the mainstream worship band. Shout out
Yes.
to them.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
And you you were very that was your thing, you if I remember correctly back then you were actually beginning to travel with the team. If they needed to do
Yeah.
a youth camp or something, you would go
Yep. Yep.
and get
Exactly.
that experience, and you're building relationships with some of
Hmm.
the people that were on the teams and stuff.
Yep.
But at that point, I didn't know that you had a pastoral gift. I didn't know that you had this preaching gift until fast forward 3, 4, 5 years later, and you do a short sermon. And as you know, and maybe some of the people listening to this don't know, I got my start in preaching and in Christian communication through fine arts back in 2010. I did a
Oh
short
wow.
sermon, and the short sermon was not the best ever. It was pretty subpar. Um, got to start somewhere. Uh, but God used that sermon, and He used the disappointment of being at fine arts and not winning, because back then, I wasn't quite mature enough to understand the the level of competition that was there. So when I went to National Fine Arts for the first time, I thought I had a real shot at winning, and I didn't win. I didn't get called back. I got a superior, and what's funny is people actually told me that I won when they saw my name and I got superior. Maybe they said something. I'm like, man, this is awesome, and
Hmm.
it didn't work out, and I was really bummed. But then I watched we all went together. This was, I believe it was a Wednesday night or something. We went as a youth group to a movie. The hotel was in the same parking lot as a movie theater back in 2010 in Detroit, and
I remember that. Yeah.
I believe
Wow.
we
That's a good
watched
memory, man.
Despicable Me, crazy
Yeah.
movie, and I couldn't really pay attention. I couldn't even really laugh. Everyone else was laughing, cracking up, and I finally, toward the end, I finally kind of lightened up a little bit, because before that, I found out that I didn't get called back, and
Yeah.
I was really disappointed, honestly. But in that moment of disappointment, we were walking from the movie theater. Everybody else was cutting up, and I ran into um, another pastor who's a pastor now, was just a fine arts student back then, Joel. Joa Ash, who's now the youth pastor at the other main satellite
Yeah.
campus for Faith
Yep.
Assembly, uh, Michigan Street campus is what it's called.
Downtown. Yep.
And at that point, he had a ministry at his school that he led, and it was called Axe Club. And I was hanging out with him. We are walking, and I forgot what he said, but something he said triggered a more reflective moment for me. And so I just said, "Hey man, let me talk to you in a little bit." And we're just walking back, and immediately God gave me this vision, and I heard this as audible as I've ever heard God's voice. I heard God speak. He said, "You're not called to preach fine arts. You're called to preach to the nations." And when I heard that, it changed everything. And
My
I'm
goodness,
like,
man.
I'm like, God, what can I do in this season that I'm in right now? Because
Yeah.
you're not putting me on a plane and sending me all over the world. I'm going to school. He said,
Right.
well, your school has people from all over the world. Go impact your school. Go make a difference.
Hmm.
So, we started with a prayer circle, and That thing kept on growing, and ultimately we brought Axe Club, which started at Winter Park High School, brought it to university, led that for a couple years, and Axe Club is still going strong. There's campus
Yep.
clubs all over the city. Some high schools and students have rebranded it, and some call it mobs. I'm not sure of some other names. I know down south there's clubs called like First Priority. There's a lot of different clubs.
Yeah, I know what
Youth
you mean.
Alive, and God's just been exploding this thing. It all started with disappointment, and the reason why I share this story, um, the reason why we're getting to this spot is because we both know that God is calling us to a new spot or a different spot or a bigger spot. But in the season that we're in, and I'm not just speaking about us, I'm speaking to anybody who's listening to this right now. Like God has a new place for you. He has a new destination for you. You're on a journey right now, and you haven't arrived yet. Like we haven't arrived yet. We haven't gotten to that place.
Hmm.
But sometimes while your journey is happening, you can feel like your car has run out of fuel. You can feel
Yeah.
like you're stopped. You're in the middle of nowhere. You have nothing. You
Yeah.
you know you feel silence. Even the audible voice of God that you felt like you heard, you're not even hearing that anymore. That's
Absolutely. Yeah.
that's a place of disappointment. But what was interesting is it was that very place of disappointment that allowed me to receive my calling.
Yeah.
And
Wow. Yeah. Exactly. Wow.
have you had a similar story? Is there a story that you can share about a season of your life where, and this could be further back, where you experienced disappointment and then it brought you to a place that kind of ushered in a new season in your life?
Um. Yeah. As a matter of fact, I really can. And it's funny because like I think I rarely tell this story because I don't know. I don't think it's because I have like pride that holds me back from people wanting to know. Like I was in a vulnerable state, but I don't
Yeah.
know. It's just it's almost like it's not that. It's just a very personal I think moment. I think for me because it embodies the fact, right, that like it kind of takes those moments of being broken and so disappointed and so lost and confused. It kind of like it almost seems like that's like a prerequisite to the things that are to come in your life that God has planned.
Right.
Like, and I don't know why He works through that, but I mean, all over the Bible, we know God is the God of like flipping the script. You think it's one thing, but really it's another. Um, and so for me, it was around the time where I finished internship. It was 2016. It was June, where I graduated internship. And I knew very well that because for those of you who don't know, the internship program at our church at the time was a 2-year program. And it came with what they called an optional third year, but it really wasn't optional. It was almost something that I mean, it literally was something you had to apply for and be accepted for. And so in a lot of cases for people applying for a third year, they had a concept or some sort of idea that they felt our ministry could really benefit from that it hadn't at the time or ever before been benefiting from, right? And so you would maybe come with a new idea like, hey, what about this? And I'll be in charge of it. You know what I mean? Like opening up a new ministry or just a new whatever, new part of our youth ministry and piloting that and kind of creating something new. So anyways, I finished in 2016 and the 2 years that is. And I had this. I don't know if anyone listening does this. I feel like a lot of Christians do this. We have this idea in our heads of like something that we want to happen, and because we want it so bad, we
Wow.
like convince ourselves that it's God's plan too. Like just because of how badly we want it.
Yeah.
Like like the only directional move that I had at that point after finishing the 2-year program was, oh, it has to be to do a third year. It has to be like nothing else. Literally nothing else makes sense, right? I finished my 2 years. I'm on fire. I'm passionate. I'm newly discovered in my own abilities and my passions and all this stuff. And so it only
Right.
makes sense, right? So I applied for a third year, and I had an interview. Um, So I went to that interview, and I still remember that day, man. I remember seeing people come out of their interviews with like certain looks on their face, and some people smiling and whatever, because other people applied for positions and got them
Yeah.
and didn't get them. So I remember I went into my meeting, and I kind of described more so than on my application what I was dreaming about for our ministry and what I wanted to lead up and create. And I had a meeting with one of the youth pastors, and basically the meeting went, and I'll try and use as close to the verbiage that was used with me in the conversation from the pastor to me. Um, at the time was literally this, and whatever. It's just the truth of the matter of the situation. It was well, we see what you're going for here, and we appreciate it. However, we're looking over these next year, 2 years, however long, and we don't, for all intents and purposes that you've described, we do not have a place for you in that slot here. And
Wow.
and so I thought long and hard about that meeting, and um, I've got to say, if I'm being very honest, and I'll preface it by saying this, I don't oftentimes really open up about the
Right.
disappointments in my life, partially because I just know that God's in control, and I don't want to give any credit to like the
Right.
doubt in my flesh of that fact. You know what I mean? Like I don't want to even go there. I want it to be proclaimed throughout my entire life, like God's in control, right? So, but this is one of, if not like the biggest disappointment that I could like ever remember in my life. Like it was the
Yeah.
biggest heartbreak. It was the biggest, I guess you could say, like confusion. It was the biggest, like I was shook. You know what I mean? Like, because again, it goes back to what I said. Like, you want something so bad that you you literally think it's God's plan, but God never
Right.
told you anything about that. He never
Yeah.
promised you that. It's just you want it so bad, and you're only able to really make that assessment in hindsight, because in the moment you so want it, you don't even talk about the possibility of it not being a thing. So, anyways, I left that meeting, smile on my face, trying to keep a smile on my face. Here's how I ended up, and just to illustrate the nature of the disappointment. A couple months before, during my second year, Pastor Michael Williams, actually the current middle school pastor at Faith Assembly, as of the time of this recording, offered me a car. He gave me his old car. He just gave it to me. It was my first car ever. It was a 2000 Chevy Impala, and it sat in my driveway for quite some time because I didn't have the money to put a part in it that it needed to get going. It was one part, I believe it was probably like $300 $400 something. Never had the money for it. And so the most use I think I ever got out of that car, rather I'll say the most important thing that car ever did for me, was one night, maybe a couple nights after that meeting, maybe even the night of that meeting, I don't quite remember, but I took the keys to that car. I opened up that driver's side door. I went in it. I shut the door. I locked the door. I put the keys in the cup holder, and I just leaned back, and I just thought, and I just started crying. I just started crying, and I was like, I was so confused. I was so lost, and it's something to be that lost after that long of feeling, like you're so on a track, right? 2 years of
Right.
feeling so purposed and so called and so ready for things to come, and like then to out of nowhere, it's like a car hits you, like, and it's so like I remember that night I yelled at God. I was yelling, man, and I don't know if anybody inside heard me. I don't think so. It was really really late, um, but yeah, I just remember like that was such a big deal to me, not only needing that moment, but also the fact that I had that moment, the fact that I reached a point where like I didn't get it, but I also was willing to like yell at God and say, I don't get it, right? Like I was so disappointed and so lost and so shook that I it was literally rock bottom for me. Like I got in that car and I screamed and I pounded that steering wheel and I prayed and I fought and
Yeah.
I was just mad. I was disappointed. I was
Yeah.
very, very, very lost. And so, I mean, that right there is the embodiment of the disappointment. Um, Talking about it now, though, it's easy to look at that and say, you know what? And I oftentimes say this. I say, I'm at where I'm at today because at my lowest, the only thing I run to is God.
Yeah.
The only thing I run to. I think that really is what separates a lot of people who want to do great things for God versus the people who maybe eventually do those
And
great things. Is that
that's so
when it all
good.
comes crashing down, when it all comes, what do you run to? Do you run back to the things that you enjoyed or found pleasure in before God, or do you run to God and say, although I don't get it, it doesn't make any sense to me, you're still the answer. You didn't give me my answer, but you're still the answer.
Yeah, man, that is so good. In Proverbs 16:9, you know the verse, it says, "In their hearts humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps."
Hmm.
And so you were in a season of your life where you were planning your course. You knew that God had called you. You knew that there was a very clear anointing on your life. You knew that you were making an impact. You knew that the way your first and second year went of internship, that a third year would go even better. You knew that you had opportunities to make things better. You knew that you were going to be better. You knew that God had given you a vision and a heart and a passion and a desire for students, for ministry. You had concepts and ways of doing things that you presented to leadership, and it didn't go your way.
Right.
But it's okay because you went to God.
Right.
You ran to God. You didn't, and maybe you wanted to, but you didn't. You
Yeah.
didn't. You didn't backmouth the
Right.
leadership. You didn't go
Right.
to your friends and be like, man,
Right.
man, Pastor blank and this and that.
Yeah.
I just don't want to say that any names right now, but
Yeah. Of course.
you didn't go back on anybody. You were steadfast even in that moment of temptation because we've all been there. We've all been in a
Right.
season of
Exactly.
disappointment, and we want to either play the blame game, we want to pass blame, we want to um, get someone back, we want to prove somebody wrong. Uh, we even take the scripture out of context and say, "Vengeance is mine," says the Lord. Um, uh, it's so easy to go there, but
Right.
that's not where you go. See, and I want to ask you about this, but when we're in a season of disappointment, really what it is it's a turning point. Think
Right.
about it.
Exactly.
Think about it. It's you think about a professional archer who has his bow and arrow, and there's a certain point in time where that arrow is released, and it goes super far, and then it hits that target, and it's a beautiful thing. But then he has to walk to that target, and it's going to take some time. And then he
Right.
gets to that target, he pulls the arrow out, and he carries the arrow back. Maybe he shot multiple arrows, but he takes that arrow nonetheless, and he brings it back. And there's a season of waiting, and that arrow, personifying bow and arrow isn't probably the most sane thing to do, but I'm gonna do it anyway. It's a good illustration nonetheless.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
he takes that arrow and he puts it in, and it's in the bow. Everything is there. You have all the all the mechanics are there, but there's none of the potential energy there.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Then the archer proceeds to pull that arrow back. And as he's pulling that arrow back, it's going in the complete opposite direction. From the perspective of that arrow, it makes no sense. It's going backwards, not forward. You know, the problem is so often we want to be an arrow that is not in a bow. What I mean by that is we want to do things in our way, the way we want it, when we want it. That arrow outside of the hands of a skilled archer is not going to go anywhere. But when that archer that is skilled and professional, he takes that arrow and he brings it back, he's skilled enough to take it where it needs to go.
Right. Exactly. That's
A-
good, man.
And you, in that season, you were being pulled back and you were being prepared so God could take you to the season that you're at right now.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
you went from not even being a third year, which without even without getting too into the details and the minutia of that situation, a third year it's not an uncommon thing.
Right.
There's at least 3 or 4 third years at any given year.
Right. Exactly.
So it's not like you were in that moment you were being promoted. It's not you're not getting paid a bunch. So
Right.
it's not like your income and that would even put a dent in the church's budget.
Right.
So
Right.
in your mind in that moment you're like, man, like they could have just done it, right?
Right.
They could have brought me on, right? And you
Right.
went from that season to the season that you're in now, serving as the youth pastor for the newest satellite campus
Hmm.
for one of the most dynamic churches in the Southeast.
Telling you, man. When you put it that way, it's kind of a little more mind blowing
It's
than I
amazing,
perceive
right?
it to be on a day to day basis. But
Tell me about it. So, how
yeah.
did you go
So
from point A to point B? And specifically, what I want to hear you talk about, because you mentioned it before, you ran to God.
yeah.
You ran to Him, and He
Yeah.
did something, and He led you to where you're at now.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, really, like I don't want to ease up on the fact that that night was one of the biggest, like, just in my heart. It's like that night where I went out to my car and I just kind of like kind of I don't know. I put it all out there with God. I did not hold back. I didn't have this like pretend behavior like that I felt like I needed to have because I was praying. Like, no, like the raw emotion that I felt as a result of what had happened was what God got that night. And I don't want to like ease up on that when it comes to anybody listening to this in terms of the significance of that to the whole thing. Like, I genuinely believe that like that's the heart that God's looking for, because at the end of the day, if you're somebody who's if you're someone who you claim to be after the will of God in your life, and you claim to be after souls and after changing the world for God, really is what it all comes down to. It's a broad
Yeah,
statement, but really that's what it is. If that is you, right, then what God's looking for in the first place is a genuine heart to begin with,
right.
right? And what a better display of a genuine heart? What better display than to, at your lowest, not mask things, not hide things, but to really just let it out there with God, right? Like, I just believe He loves that and wants that for His
Yes,
children. So that's number one, is just like, I can't let up on the significance of that night in my life. And for whoever's listening, man, like the significance of a moment or moments like that in your life, like after
right.
disappointment, that being what your soul is positioned as and what your heart looks like. But more practically speaking, in terms of the physical, like, what did I do between that year and a half almost of it was, I think it was literally a year and a half between that time and when I got hired. But what did I do, right? That's a long time, a year and a half. Well, I'll tell you this. I kind of I consider myself somebody who is blessed in a certain area, and that is this area. Um, it is the area of being able to kind of sit back, if you I don't know if that's the term, but it's the area of being able to just relax and say, you know what, life's good. Like, I'm I got 10 fingers, 10 toes, all my limbs. I got food on the table, you know what I mean? Like, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
obviously that's in regards to God and Him being in control, but I think I'm pretty blessed in that area. I don't want to take anything away from people who maybe have a hard time with that, who struggle with anxiety and all that, and whatever. But I will say that. And so over that year and a half, what it looked like was, dude, I took the gifts and talents that I had just discovered, right? I took this 2 years as almost like waking up from a dream, right? But a dream where you really got your life changed and you really learned a lot, and really things are not at all the way they were before you fell asleep. Like, I took it as like, okay, that was insanely valuable and was maybe the most important period of time in my life to date, right? Um, so I'm going to take that and I'm going to do what I assume God would have me do with it, even though what I'm looking at in my life isn't what I assumed God wanted for my life. You know what I mean? Like, so I'm looking around, I'm like, okay, well, I'm not on staff here or part-time staff, or I'm not a third year, whatever. That's not what I assumed God wanted, but God did show me a lot over these 2 years. So I'm going to do what I assume God wants me to do. So, point blank period, what it was, I stayed faithful to serving at my church. I stayed faithful to serving at my church. I did not go home. I did not give up. I did not. Now, here's the thing: I didn't have any goal in mind, right? I didn't do that. When I promise you this, I wish I could put everyone in my brain at the time, like to have them understand. Like I genuinely, so I kept serving, playing drums. I would go to outreaches. I kept teaching Voice AM, which is our college age and young adult Sunday school. They put me in charge of that, and so through all that time, I stayed faithful. I kept teaching, preparing lessons. I remember what was one
It's
Sunday
awesome.
throughout that period of a year and a half. I literally went to church with the flu, like full on influenza, like full on, to teach that Sunday school class because I wasn't able to call out in time, like no one could cover it. Um, and so like, oh my gosh, you could ask some people, they remember like I taught that class and by the end of it, I was dripping sweat because my fever had to be like 102 or something like that, maybe higher. I
Whoa.
have no idea what it was. It was really, really bad. Like I don't understand how I don't know. I ended up at the doctor's, not the hospital, but whatever. It was bad. But anyways, yeah, it's literally, that's the word, is faithfulness. I stayed faithful and with nothing in my heart as like an ulterior motive. I just kept pressing on. But also too, I always say this to people. I didn't do it like worried about the future. I did it with a genuine peace in my heart for the whole thing. Like I did it with a genuine, like this is the dream type of feel. You know what I mean? Like it's not, I'm not chasing anything. This is it. You know what I mean? Like this is it. You know, loving people, loving the church, serving the church, and working to save souls, man, and just being the kingdom, like the kingdom minded. And so that's really it, man. I kept on staying encouraged by being around godly people as best I could, and I just kept going. And I firmly believe that God saw that, and He rewarded it with an even more um, established, I guess you could say, or more organized thing in my life, or more organized medium through which I could do ministry, right? I don't want people listening to think that you have to be on staff at a church to do ministry. No, no, no. But it is a blessing, right? And I believe it's something that God looks at His people and says, okay, well, who's hungriest to be kingdom minded, and blesses those people with that type of opportunity. So that was my year and a half between. And man, it's so funny when you put it that way, though. Like, you know, looking at the back end versus the front end, it is kind of crazy.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, definitely.
I know that this was a very vulnerable season of
Right.
your life, and it may not be, to most people it might not be a highlight moment. Believe it or not, though, for you in the season that you're in right now, it probably was a highlight moment if you think about it.
Hmm.
Because again, going back to what we said before, the great Chuck Swindoll said, "Life is 10% what happens to you, and 90% how you respond."
Yeah.
So, this whole discussion that we're having right now is about dealing with disappointment.
Right.
That dealing word is the important word. Disappointment happens.
Yeah.
How do we deal with it? And
Right.
that's our response. And so,
Hmm.
correct me if I'm wrong, but you responded with faithfulness.
Hmm.
You were faithful.
Right.
You continued to serve.
Right.
You weren't an intern. You weren't necessarily doing intern things. You weren't, correct me if I'm wrong, but you weren't showing up at 8 a.m. every morning anymore.
Right.
You weren't part of the team per se. You weren't going to all the staff meetings per se, but
Correct. Yeah.
you were faithful with pastoring team, which is what they call the adult leadership team for the college
Hmm.
ministry at Faith Assembly, called the Voice. You were
Right.
serving faithfully there. You were obedient, and you were faithful with what God had given you. And in that season, you were cultivating your gifts. You were you were teaching, so you were developing your ability to speak and to develop content for messages, for lessons. You were interacting with people, you were answering questions. you were really cultivating your gifts. And in that moment,
Right.
you probably weren't even thinking about that. You weren't waking up with the flu, trying to get to
Right.
Faith Assembly of God and lead Voice AM, worried about, man, am I going to give somebody my sickness? Avoiding shaking people's hands, being careful in how you open up the door. Maybe not.
Right.
Uh, you weren't thinking about, today I'm going to church, I'm going to lead this, and I'm going to become a better speaker. I am going to
Right.
become a better teacher. No, you're
Right.
like, man, if I don't show up and I don't do this, man, someone's going to be really mad at
Yep.
me. I mean,
Yeah.
there's going to be about 15, 20 people there, and they're going to sit there for 20 minutes wondering what is going on.
Yep.
And Jonathan's not there.
Mhm.
That's all he cared about. But
Yeah.
look at God in that season, in that moment of time where you're obedient
Right.
and you're serving.
Yep.
Man, tell me about it. Tell me about, now that we can go back and we can reflect on that season. Tell me about how you see that. How you see that your obedience and your faithfulness led to the season that you're in now.
Yeah. So, in terms of like a very, very practical sense, here's what I think. Like, um, it's kind of all a chain reaction a little bit. So, like, I'll just say it this way. Like, okay, so my discovery, or I guess you could say what God kind of placed inside of me, was a desire to do ministry, and specifically teach with my mouth,
Yeah.
and preach with my mouth. You know what I mean? Like verbally, minister that way, and encourage with my mouth, and all this stuff. Um, so that's what I stayed faithful in over that year and a half period. As I stayed faithful in that, though, right? Like I was being given the opportunity, because I was still there and faithful and didn't turn away or anything like that, and whatever. I was given opportunities to continue teaching Voice AM, and I was given opportunities to continue speaking at our college age and young adult service, and um, yeah, like I was just afforded opportunities, right, in the department of what I believed I was called to do with my life.
Right.
And so it's kind of not it's not really a coincidence, right? So because of my faithfulness, I was afforded more opportunities, and then because of those opportunities, um, somebody took notice somewhere. You know what I mean? And said, "Well, wait a second. There's an ability and an anointing, perhaps even there, that I believe. This the leadership would be thinking this, but that we believe God maybe wants to use." And so I remember the conversation with Pastor Jason. Dustin, I don't know if you were there that one night at the Voice, our college age service, but there was a night at the Voice where we were in the youth building, and
Right.
and the power actually went out pre-service.
Yeah.
They couldn't figure out how to get it back on.
Yeah.
Generators, I guess, hadn't been working, what have you. So we went over to the main sanctuary. We had service in the main sanctuary of our church that night.
Yeah. I remember that.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, and
weird.
I remember David Famous, who he moved to New York a
Yeah.
couple months ago. Or I guess, well, it's coming up on a year, I guess now.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyways, he was like the MC, and he whatever. Like we were just kind of improvising the service. I remember that night
Yeah.
very vividly, and so but it was that night. That night has a lot of significance in my life, because it was that morning, actually, after I had drummed at Redbug campus, which, by the way, was another instance, if I do say so myself, of me staying faithful to what God has blessed me with and what I believe He called me to. But yeah, like after I had gotten off drums that morning, Pastor Jason, who is the campus pastor of our Redbug campus, he pulled me aside and said, "Hey, I'm preaching at the Voice tonight. Do you have a second after service for us to maybe chat? It was a pretty cool opportunity I want to talk to you about." And I said, "Yeah, for sure." And that was the night where the power went out, and he preached there in the main sanctuary. And then I remember exactly where we sat after service, where he pulled me aside, and we sat down, and he said, "Hey, me and the staff were talking, and me and Pastor Johnny, who was at the time and the lead youth pastor of Mainstream, who's since moved on to be the executive pastor of the church." So he said, me and Pastor Johnny were talking, and we said, it's funny the way he worded it. I love this. He said, me and Pastor Johnny were talking, and we thought, "Hey, what's Jonathan doing?" as the way he worded it to me. He said, "Hey, what's Jonathan doing?" And what's funny is there's a couple different answers that I could have given to that, or that would have been the answer to that question had I gone down a different route from the one I had gone in terms of my decision after being, rejected, quote unquote, for the third year position. Because I could have jumped into, going to school for something. You know what I mean? I could have jumped in to just straight up working like full time at some career, maybe, doing something. I don't know. Like there could have been so many different answers to that question. The real answer though, to that was, oh, nothing. You know what I mean? He's working, and and he's serving here at the church. That's literally it. And so it's crazy, but yeah, like that was literally the answer. I said, yeah, I mean, okay, I mean, I'm just serving. That's it. And he said this. He said, well, let's do this. Let me call you on Thursday. Pray about it, think about it, see how you feel, and we'll talk Thursday. And what's so funny to me is that now that, and it's funny because this is like the first time I'm really looking back on this.
Yeah.
One of the first times. What's funny is that I look back and I think, okay, Thursday, right? I hadn't even played at our satellite campus on Michigan Street. It's called the Rush, is the youth church name out there. I hadn't played there in a while before this, and I don't even think I've played there since this Thursday that I'm talking about. But it was the Thursday after I got offered the position. I was playing drums at the Rush youth service, which is just another example of just servanthood. Like, it's just so crazy to me. I rarely get to, just because of my work schedule at the time, and even now, like, play there. But it was one Thursday where it just worked out. And so it's funny telling the story about like staying faithful serving, and that's another perfect example. But I was almost walking inside. I was sitting in my car, and he called me, and we talked about it. And I said right there, I said, I'm 100% down. We're ready to rock and roll. We're good to go. And yeah, that was that. He said, awesome. Well, let's meet Sunday after church or whatever. And then we talked and met for the first time. And we planned other times to meet and work on things at the church, and I just dived head first into what was going on at the time, and here we are. So that's really exactly what it looked like around that time. Was just being faithful to the point where, like, when they asked the question, I just what's he doing? I literally said nothing, just serving. That's it. That's really it. I didn't move out of the city, or not that there's anything wrong with doing that after the
Yeah.
internship program, but for my lane, I know that would have been a response out of spite and frustration rather than direction from God. You know what I mean? The real direction I was getting was just be still and
Yeah.
continue on and press on. So yeah, that was really it.
Yeah, man, that's amazing. So you just continue to be faithful. You continue to play the drums. You continue to serve with the college ministry, and uh, from there, you just continue to grow in favor with Pastor Jason and the youth staff and Pastor Johnny. Um,
Yep, correct.
and here you are, continuing to serve faithfully.
It's a wild thing,
Yeah,
but yes.
yeah, man. And Redbug is a very unique campus. The majority of the sermons on a Sunday morning are actually uh, they're they're brought over, live streamed from
Mm-hmm.
the main
Correct.
sanctuary at
On a
Faith
very large
Assembly.
screen.
Yeah, very large. And what's funny is, you have, in my opinion, one of the best communicators in the world. I put Jason
Right.
Alvarado up there with the Stephen Furtick's, with
Oh yeah. He's
yeah,
incredible, man.
he's the gold standard for communication. And it's
Absolutely.
probably better saved for another podcast. But
Right.
uh, I, I'll just leave it at this. I want to keep cultivating that gift in communication, and
Yeah.
the only way to do it is, number one, to actually speak, and
Right.
number two, learn as much as you can from the people that are doing well. And
Right. Exactly.
Jason's one of those guys, so he's there and he's serving.
100%.
And Redbug is a church. It is a church within a church,
Right.
and it is different than Faith Assembly, but it is still Faith Assembly. So, without going off on a tangent too much, I want to hear you very quickly talk about that dynamic and how your continued obedience and faithfulness to this this vision that you're bringing to the table. Let me just build a context for this before just so that we just stay on track. So you clearly know that God is calling you to bigger and better things. And in this season of your life, you are serving as the youth pastor for Redbug. It's not the biggest youth ministry in the world, even though it's part of one of the biggest. It's not. You don't. You don't even really have, besides the youth night that you're going to begin to do in a couple weeks. At the recording of this podcast, you're not. You don't actually have a full-fledged service with a full band. You're not doing the things that even maybe other youth ministries are doing, but you're still serving faithfully right now as the youth pastor.
That is correct.
Tell me about this season and how the season that you're at right now and the obedience that you're in right now is preparing you for the continued growth and effectiveness of the youth ministry in right now, and even God willing, I'm not saying that God's going to move you or God's going to do something different in your life, but God is preparing you for whatever that next season is, whatever that is.
Right. Yeah. So really, really good question. And I'll answer it this way. I said something earlier, and it had to do with what we're talking about at that point, but I'll say it again here. So I look at our youth ministry and I look at our church as a whole, that being the Redbug Lake campus, and I say kind of what you just said, like, it's not the biggest, right? It's not huge. It has grown, first of all, but from what it was, but it's really not the biggest. And the conversation of where's God moving me in my life, where are you going next type thing, that really is a fascinating thing to me, because I think you would agree, I don't think it's right to look at where I'm at right now as any less significant than any other pastor or active ministry really out there, right? It's important to understand that building the kingdom is building the kingdom. And it's important to ask yourself the question, am I pushing myself, to the furthest of my ability? But at the end of the day, like, I don't look at where I'm at right now and say, oh, it's small and I want to do something bigger. Like, I don't really do that. However, I can't shake the feeling, you know what I mean, that God does have more, right? Whether it be for me personally or for our ministry, you know what I mean? I believe for both He has more, right? But I said something before, and it was this. It was like, I looked at my surroundings and I said, you know what? This is the dream. I think I watched a video, I think it was probably 2 weeks ago, and it was actually a video of Kobe Bryant the night that they retired his jersey.
Yeah.
And he gave a little mini speech about that. He said, kind of, I guess, his words to other people who are striving for greatness. He said, when you get up in the morning early, when you stay, in the gym an extra hour, right? Or when you work extra hard at something, when it's hard to do what you believe you should do, but you do it anyways. He said that is the dream.
Yeah.
He said that's the dream. And so I look at the ministry I have right now, not as some sort of chapter 1 to a potential chapter 10. You know what I mean? I look at it as, no. This is the book, and this is the dream. Like, this is as important and spectacular as anything God will call me to do when it comes to the spiritual significance of it, right? When it comes to, like, how pretty it looks on an Instagram post, sure. Like, there may be something down the road that is prettier. You know what I mean? That is maybe more eye-catching to the mainstream public, right? Like, oh, look what I did versus look what I did. You know what I mean? However, if I'm going to be a genuine human being who, like, really loves the things of God and the people of God, I've got to look at where I'm at as the dream, period. Like, the fervor with which I chase this, I have to understand, like I need to match whatever fervor I would chase like preaching to 10,000 people with.
Right.
Like I have to match that to what I'm doing now, because like it is the dream, man. Like no soul that I preach to later is any less or more valuable than the souls I get to preach to on a daily or weekly basis,
Yeah.
with our current ministry. So yeah, to answer your question, it's a very interesting thought process and conversation to have. But so yes, I believe there's more. I always believe there's more, right? But like I also believe I'm living in the more right now.
Right. I love that you say that. So your your present attitude toward your present circumstances is very it's a very mature and right way to approach. And again, this entire conversation is concerning dealing with disappointment.
Yeah.
And one of the one of the key responses that we have to life is to live in the moment.
Yeah.
And you have continued to be faithful in the moment. And you're not even concerned or worried about what that next opportunity will be. And you mentioned this earlier, but you're focused on what is God doing in your life right now. Like
Right.
you're serving Redbug, and so tomorrow you're gonna go to Redbug, and you're gonna serve faithfully. Um, you're you're gonna meet people. You're gonna no doubt talk to students. You have your meetings on Sunday, right?
Right.
So you're gonna be operating in the fullness of your ministry. You know, Jonathan is living his best life right
Right.
now, and you're gonna be doing that. It's gonna be
Right.
awesome, and
Right.
tomorrow is gonna be a beautiful day. You're gonna do
Mhm.
that. You're not worried about the pastor Jonathan doing this and this and that 10 years from now.
Right.
You're not worried about that because you're so focused and you're so intently passionate about the Jonathan that has the opportunity to be an impact and serve tomorrow morning.
Right.
That's great. That's really great. Man, I'm I'm really glad that we're having this conversation.
Mhm.
It's really really good to kind of sit back and I believe I believe that this shared experience between us and the people that are listening right now of just sitting back and thinking about, man, God's got us. Like if you're on the other side of
Mm.
this right now, like God's got you. Like
Oh my
he is
gosh.
with you.
100%, man.
He is with you. And one revelation that I had a few months ago is God is a God of progress, but even more so, He's a God of process. And there's times where you may not see the progress, but you will see the process if you keep being faithful. And I know, I know when we spoke about doing this a little bit earlier, we talked about a passage of scripture in Genesis concerning Joseph and where he was, and he received a coat of many colors. He received a dream from God. He knew that he was going to be this great leader, and he knew that he at least he knew that his brothers would bow down to him, and that he would be the greatest in his family. He believed that. He knew that because God had given him a dream. But fast forward a few chapters, and he's in a pit. He's alone, and at that moment, he doesn't know. He's not us reading the Bible, maybe reading the story for the third time or the eighth time or the 100th time. Like he's living that moment. He's in a pit, and he thinks he's gonna die. Probably. I know if I was thrown in the pit by my brothers who hated me, I would think the worst. Yet he continues to be faithful. and he continued to be faithful. I can't help though but fast forward many, many years down the line. We get through the wilderness with you have the Israelites. So Moses and leads the Israelites out of Egypt, and they're going to that promised land, but they're in the wilderness, and Moses dies, and this is I believe at the end of Deuteronomy. I believe Moses dies, and actually at the beginning of Joshua, and Joshua takes over as the leader of the Israelites. And God immediately gives Joshua the leadership and the anointing and the go ahead to move into the promised land. But before they get to that promised land, they must cross and conquer Jericho, very big walled city. And long story short, a lot of people know the story. I'm going to say it anyway. God has Joshua and his men, they walk around Jericho 6 days in a row. They walk around one time each day. They're not doing anything. They're not conquering the city. There's some mighty warriors that are with Joshua. If they wanted to, they could conquer that city. They could take what they want. But Joshua is obedient and he's faithful. And he walks around that city 6 times. There's no progress whatsoever. It's not like each time they walk around, God lets a brick fall or a rock fall or, no, just walk around. On the 7th day, God tells him to walk around 7 times. First time, nothing happens. Second time, nothing happens. Third time, fourth time, fifth time, sixth time, nothing happens. Yet Joshua and his men are still being faithful. There's process, but there's definitely not any progress. On the 7th time, they walk around, they have the trumpets, they're loud, and without even moving a muscle in contact with the wall, the walls come tumbling down. Not because of anything that Joshua and his men did, but because of what God did. Why did this happen? Because Joshua was faithful and he was obedient. And to everybody listening to this right now, I'm not sure what you're going through. I'm not sure what your Jericho is. I'm not sure what your pit is. But as you continue to be faithful in what you have, maybe it's a job, maybe you're working at a job and you're not getting paid a whole lot, or maybe you are serving in your church and maybe you want to lead worship, but right now the youth pastor has you doing sound and that's it. Whatever it is, whatever you know exactly what it is. I mean, you're continuing to listen to this because you have something in mind, whatever that is. I believe that as long as you continue to remain faithful to what your present season is, God will bring progress like never before. It'll be awesome. You just wait. Man, thank you. And to each of you listening, thank you. This is Blue Fire Talks podcast with Dustin Smith. Again, we had Jonathan Reyes on, pastor at Faith Assembly for their Satellite Redbug campus for the youth ministry. Again, thank you, Jonathan. Thanks for being on.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.